I'm going to read a short excerpt here from my book, Following My Thumb, A Decade of Unabashed Wanderlust. It chronicles my travels throughout the 1990s, from Europe to the western U.S., to Alaska, to Hawaii, and to India. So this is in part 5 of the book, a chapter titled A Rupee is Only Worth a Rupee. And it talks about my first introduction to India, my first trip to India. I've actually been to India 4 times. This was my very first trip when I spent 5 months there in 1990 and 2000. So this is describing my experience in the taxi ride on the way from the airport to the hotel. Despite everything I'd heard beforehand, all the crazy stories from other travelers, all the photo books I'd perused, I was still unprepared for the stark change of reality, of consciousness, of humanity that is India. It felt much like time traveling into the past, or perhaps like an odd, jumbled mixture of past, present, and future. But even more evident than the technological shift backwards, which was striking but expected, was a cultural shift in the Western world that was difficult to grasp. The sheer numbers of people and vehicles on the street was unlike anything in Western cities. There was so much sensory input going on all at once that I could hardly figure out how to process it. The traffic became extremely congested as we neared the main part of the city, and yet there were no dividing lines on the pavement to separate the 5 or 6 lanes of traffic. Puttering old mopeds zipped between the cars, carrying entire families of 4 or 5. Young children wove through the cluttered lines of traffic at intersections, begging at the stopped cars, including a girl, perhaps 8 or 9, who came to our vehicle in a stained white dress, with a dirty face, stringy dark hair, and sparkling, vibrant, haunting brown eyes. The driver ignored her as if she were a ghost. When she came around to my side of the car, I just smiled and waved a little, feeling a mix of guilt, compassion, and the overarching exhaustion that left me unable to react to much of anything right now. I just spent 36 hours flying there from San Francisco between flights and layovers, so I was totally wiped out. I considered reaching into my pocket and sifting through my wad of cash to hand her something, but before that could happen, we were on our way again, weaving through the turbulent maelstrom of a still developing civilization. Cows were lying halfway in the road, undisturbed by the constant commotion around them. Monkeys swung from tattered trees that hung out over the traffic, their frenzied activity eerily lit by randomly placed and flickering street lamps. Many of the city streets were unpaved, and none of the scattered stoplights seemed to be working. The drivers managed to avoid hitting one another by some means of subtle communication entirely beyond my comprehension. And since there were no crosswalks, people crossed the street simply by putting out their hand as a signal to keep from being run over, then launching casually into the clogged stream of traffic. Thinking back on it, the taxi ride that night was a frenetic, overwhelming blur of unfamiliar cultural immersion that altogether bewildered my clouded, sleepy consciousness. It was like trying to watch TV when there were 3 different channels all superimposed on top of one another. It was just too much to try to sort out. And yet on some other level, once you let go of the expectation of understanding what was going on, instead surrendering to the very different flow of life and adjusting your perceptions, it almost seemed as if this mad jumble of assorted chaos managed to work together in a method of orderliness. It was just different, way different. And as it became clear that my driver was perfectly capable of making it through the pandemonium, despite my apprehension, I did my best just to sit back, relax, and go with the flow, and trust that it would all work itself out one way or another. So that is from A Rupee is Only Worth a Rupee in Following My Thumb.